Good morning, man. Please, I'm Court Kareem Johnson on behalf of Miss Molly White, who's in custody.
All right, she should be here just a moment.
Possession of the controlled substance methamphetamine as a fourth habitual felony offender based upon a jury. That trial was held on June 3rd of this year, and there are four offenses. One, for tampering with evidence. Second, for a assault resist destructive police officer. A charge of delivery of the controlled substance methamphetamine and bringing contraband into a jail. Mr. Ringster.
Yes, Your Honor. There's three different types of punishment, as this court is aware of. One were for rehabilitation. When this court goes through this criminal history, which I know this court does, I believe the court will see that there is no rehabilitation for Molly White at this point in time. In fact, she seems to think that she's above the law, and most of the times with the criminal history as is. But the second one would be protection of society as a whole, which, again, going through her criminal history, you'll see that she does have an awful lot of thefts and drug crimes. She is a drug dealer. I believe that the court sat through both of the trials, heard the testimony of Tiffany Jacobson, which I think supports the fact that she's a drug dealer. And certainly these charges, as stated, shows that she is a drug dealer. So I do believe the society needs protection from her. The biggest one is deterrence. So many times when we have drug cases and things like that, unfortunately, guidelines would say, oh, maybe just rehab, maybe a slap on the wrist, maybe a little bit of prison time. In this particular case, we're dealing with high guidelines. And I think that for deterrence purposes, she does need to be able to go away for a long time also. I think that we need to be able to set an example that if you mess with drugs, if you mess with our jail system, this is what could happen to you at this point. The guidelines are the way they are. Recommendations for 15 years. I think that Molly White has deserved at least the 15 years, if not more.
You know, my client deserves to go to prison. I mean, we concede that, we don't argue that. The issue here is what is a fair punishment? And the prosecution, the first statement about Miss White is that she's a drug dealer. So was I. I sat on a college campus with a marijuana joint before marijuana was legal, smoked it, and passed it to somebody else. I delivered marijuana. That was a crime. That was delivery. I didn't make any money from that transaction. And I think courts should make a distinction between for-profit dealers that traffic narcotics into a community and make their living selling narcotics to particular people, and users who trade in narcotics for other narcotics supplies, or in this case, clean urine. Miss White did not make any money from this transaction here, but she did engage in what I will admit is one of the cardinal sins in the criminal justice system. She committed a crime while she was in jail, trying to resolve accusations of another crime. And, that is disrespectful to the court. It's disrespectful to the law. The court heard the testimony. A lot of people think that she was high or thought that she was high or under the influence when she engaged in that behavior. Miss White sits here, today, with forced sobriety, and realizes how she has sacrificed a good part of her life to drug use, and is going to sacrifice some other good part of time in her life away from her children because of her drug use. I cannot sit here and justify anybody having 15 felony convictions. I'm not even going to get into the misdemeanors. But she's going to jail, y'all. She's going to prison. We understand. But for her level of involvement, the small amount of methamphetamine that we're talking about, I couldn't even do the math. Assuming that the prosecutor's theory was right, and she snuck an 8-ball, 3.5, ounces into, 3.5 grams into the jail. I couldn't even do the math on how many days she's going to get there's too many numbers behind the decimal point to do the math per number. So for an individual who is not a for-profit dealer, for an individual who wasn't maintaining a dangerous meth house that was emitting gas into the environment that had a fire risk for an individual who may have been high and suffering from the effects of narcotics dependency at the time she committed the crime, I'd ask the court to sentence her to 9 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. That is almost a decade. That is what you would see for violent offenders. That, I believe, takes into consideration the harm she did to herself, the harm she caused or could have caused to other people had that methamphetamine been laced with fentanyl. It takes into account, the numerous felony convictions she's had. It takes into account the fact that she did this while in custody.
I know that I've been standing in front of you for a long time in my life, and I can't justify that. I am an addict, and I understand that, and I do need help. I understand people don't think that I'm the person that I've made mistakes, and I own up to them. I don't try to take other people down with me. I don't even have excuses for that. The only thing I can ask is for, I don't even know how to say it, a chance to come out of here. And I understand prison's going to happen. Understood. Like, I'm still a mom and I still have custody of my daughter. Yes. I know that I can't change anything. However, I can only ask for, even doing a prison sentence that I still understand and I get help while I'm in there as well.
All right. Thank you, Ms. White. Now, you have a long criminal history. You've had 31 adult entries, and I know there's some dismissal, so clearly I don't take any dismissal into consideration, but you are a young person. You're under 40, between 35 and 40. I'm not supposed to say a woman's in public, so I'm just going to give you a range. So Molly has a relatively long criminal history, and it involves a lot of crimes of dishonesty, like theft and retail fraud, which is why I say drugs are not victimless crime. So we have issues with deceptions, but we also have issues with prior deliveries of controlled substances. Back in 2012, that there were 4 people in the car, and there was testimony that Miss White was on the phone and needed to go someplace to either pick up or to deliver methamphetamine. Now, she didn't do it. I'm not sentencing her for that, but that's where the people have legitimacy of saying she's a drug dealer, just even in that file alone. And this is where she was the driver, and she was passing it around to people in the vehicle, and that put other people at risk because she was using as well. That's the problem of controlled substances. So it put other people at risk. As to count 1, tampering with evidence. Again, the court exercises its discretion to sentence the defendant as a 4th habitual felony offender, which increases the potential maximum up to 180 months. Therefore, the court sentences the defendant to that count to 24 to 180 months. And the defendant receives 239 days of credit in that file. As to count 2, this is the assault, resist, obstruct a police officer. Again, exercising the discretion to sentence the defendant as a 4th habitual felony offender. The court sentences the defendant to 24 to 180 months, again with 239 days of credit. The count 4 is bringing the contraband into a jail or prison. Again, I used to work at a prison. I began my legal career at the United States Disciplinary Barracks for the Department of Defense, and I know how different and restrictive and pressurizing life is inside of a jail. Pack of gum, a soda can be worth hundreds of dollars. So when you're looking at controlled substances here, this wasn't merely bringing it in. It was she could have just flushed it down the toilet, but she didn't. Well, at least initially. All right, so the court here sentenced the defendant to 224 to 180 months. Count 3 is the delivery of methamphetamine. Again, while she may have been, in effect, passing it around, she could have just flushed it. And in each case, she was delivering it by giving it to people. And that's a crime. And it's quite clear that she is dealing methamphetamine. So here, the court sentences the defendant as follows: 180 to 240 months, 239 days of credit. You may fill out the bottom half and request the appointment of an appellate counsel. Must return it within 42 days. And I see Ms. White probably filling out the forms right now, which I don't blame her. That happens all the time. Anything else, Mr. Blazing?
No, thanks, Your Honor.
Mr. Ringstrom
No, Your Honor.
and Mr. Johnson?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Molly, I do really sincerely wish you good luck. You're always nice generally here in the court. Again, good people make bad decisions, and when it involves controlled substances, it's really hard. All right, thank you. We're adjourned.
This transcript centers on Molly White's sentencing after being convicted on multiple drug-related and jail-related charges, including possession and delivery of methamphetamine, tamper with evidence, resisting or obstructing a police officer, and bringing contraband into jail. At the start of the hearing, the prosecution argues that White's record shows she is beyond rehabilitation, describing her as someone who repeatedly breaks the law, has a long history of theft and drug offenses, and poses a danger to society. The prosecutor emphasizes three sentencing goals: rehabilitation, protection of the public, and deterrence, but makes clear that rehabilitation no longer seems realistic in White's case. Instead, the state focuses heavily on deterrence and public safety, arguing that her conduct, especially bringing methamphetamine into a jail and distributing it there, deserves a severe sentence. The prosecutor asked the court to impose at least 15 years, saying White's repeated criminal behavior and drug dealing show she needs to be removed from society for a long time. White's defense attorney does not try to deny her guilt or argue that she should avoid prison. Instead, he accepts that she deserves punishment, but asks the court to distinguish between a large-scale, profit-driven drug trafficker and a drug addict whose crimes were tied to addiction and poor choices rather than organized criminal enterprise. He argues that while White did deliver methamphetamine, she was not making money from it and was acting more like an addict caught in a cycle of dependency than professional dealer. He also acknowledges that committing a crime while already in jail is a serious insult to the court and the justice system, but asks the judge to consider the relatively small quantity of meth involved and the fact that addiction was driving much of her behavior. The defense says White has already ruined a large part of her life through drugs and is now facing years away from her children. Because of that, counsel asked the judge for a 9-year sentence, arguing that nearly a decade in prison would still be an extremely serious punishment that account for her criminal history, the risks created by her actions, and the fact that the offenses happened while she was in custody. When White herself addresses the court, she does not make excuses. She admits she is an addict, says she understands she needs help, and accepts that prison is going to happen. Her main plea is for a chance to eventually come back from this and to receive treatment while incarcerated. She also reminds the court that she is still a mother and still has custody of her daughter, which add an emotional dimension to her statement. Even though she knows she cannot undo what happened, she asks for mercy in the sense of being given some hope for rehabilitation and an opportunity to get help while serving her sentence. Her statement presents her less as defiant and more as someone who recognizes the damage addiction has done to her life. Before imposing sentence, the judge reviews White's extensive criminal history in detail. The court notes that although some entries were dismissed and will not be counted against her, she still has an extremely long adult record despite being under 40 years old. The judge highlights that her history is full of dishonest conduct, including theft and retail fraud, and says this is one reason drugs are not victimless crimes. They often fuel deception, stealing, and harm to other people. The court also references an older case involving controlled substances from 2012, saying that even though White is not being sentenced for that prior conduct today, the fact of that case help explain why the prosecution views her as a drug dealer rather than simply a user. The judge points out that in that earlier incident there was testimony suggesting she was actively involved in picking up or delivering methamphetamine and exposing others to danger while using drugs herself. When the judge turns to current offenses, the court makes clear that the most serious concern is not only that White possessed methamphetamine, but that she brought it into a jail environment and distributed it there. The judge explains that contraband inside a jail or prison has an especially dangerous impact because even small items can carry huge value and create chaos in a highly restricted environment. The court notes that White had opportunities to get rid of the meth. She could have flushed it, but instead she kept it and passed it around, which made the conduct more serious. The judge repeatedly stresses that giving methamphetamine to others is delivery under the law and that, in the court's view, the evidence showed she was in fact dealing methamphetamine. That conclusion shapes the final sentence. The court then sentences White as a fourth habitual felony offender on the various counts. For tampering with evidence, she receives 24 to 180 months. For assaulting, resisting, or obstructing a police officer, she again receives 24 to 180 months. For bringing contraband into a jail or prison, the court imposes another 24 to 180 months. On the delivery of methamphetamine charge, the most serious count, the judge imposes a much harsher sentence of 180 to 240 months, which amounts to 15 to 20 years. She is also awarded 239 days of jail credit. After announcing the sentence, the judge advises White of her right to request appointed appellate counsel and gives her instructions on filing the paperwork within 42 days. Even after imposing a lengthy sentence, the judge closes on a somewhat sympathetic note, telling White that she generally behaves respectfully in court, wishing her good luck, and remarking that good people can make bad decisions, especially when controlled substances are involved. Overall, the hearing presents a clash between addiction-based mitigation and a court determined to punish repeat drug crime harshly, with the judge ultimately siding with the prosecution's view that White's record and the seriousness of bringing meth into jail justified a very long prison sentence.